Clive Gray, and welcome back to We the People, termlimits.com. And I'm here again with my co-host today, Debbie Peterson, Mayor of Grover Beach, and businesswoman and author. And we're here to talk about a couple of Hall of Shamers, as I call them, Senator Hoyer and Chris Smith. But before we get into that, there was an interesting little article about the senator, I think, from Hawaii, and I just went blank on her name.
Oh, was it Tulsi? Tulsi Gabbard?
Yes, Congresswoman. Okay, sorry, I stand corrected. But anyway, it was an interesting article because, like Debbie, she's from the opposite side of the aisle, if you will, but I've always respected her because she works with the truth. And when it didn't agree with her party, she would go with what she considered to be the truth and best for the people. And I see,
Clive, I always say there is no aisle because a third of us are somewhere in the middle of that aisle. And most of us, if you take it as a bell curve, we're hanging right there in the middle of it. So I think the aisle is a false precept.
Well, especially in today's time, and I'd have to agree with you on that. And Tulsi Gabbard, I would agree, but there was a thing where she was actually the shining star of the Democratic Party when she first started. And then she was kind of given the cold shoulder because she didn't agree with them. And she just announced that she is leaving the Democratic Party. What do you think about that?
That's one of the things that really worries me about the parties. It seems to me that the way our democracy was set up, well, it's not really truly a democracy, but we'll talk about that another time. But the way it was set up was so that we could have spirited discourse, as you and I from time to time have. And
Yes.
And when you have a party dictating that you're going to get the cold shoulder if you bring in some spirited discourse, or if you decide you want to have spirited discourse with someone who disagrees, who's perhaps in the other party, we have a problem. So I have to say, I really represent this one. I really respect this woman. Probably
Yes.
resemble her too.
Right. No, and you do. And I mean, she is risking her political career to do this. But that's what's so great about this is because she is willing to do that, to do what she believes is best for her constituency. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. Anyway, today we're going to be discussing a gentleman by the name of Steny Hoyer. That's an interesting name. And Representative Chris Smith. So with that, let's move on to our discussion. Okay. Welcome back. And today our Hall of Shamers. We're going to start with Steny Hoyer. That's an interesting Democrat out of Maryland. Perhaps Liberty has a little more information on this.
Well, Mr. Steny Hoyer, look, these senators are doing it like this. My human says he loves me. He tells me to sit, stay, and sometimes roll over. And I do get a treat, right? But when I go to my play area, my bed is still there, my toys are still there, and I'm happy to guard the house and watch for people who don't belong. Basically, that's how things should work. But senators like Hoyer, he tells other humans to sit, stay, and roll over, and they get a treat promised, and sometimes they don't get that treat. But even if they do get the treat, the toys in the bed are being removed, and they're all distracted by the treat instead of worrying about their bed and their toys being removed. So if it was me, I would stop watching the House for him. And I've heard these same people keep electing him in. Why? I joined We the People and Dogs because I want these humans to wake up and vote to get these guys out of here. Get some fresh, young, new people in and solve problems and be responsible. And that's all I have to say.
Right. And that's another thing too, is these people, it's not just the time they've served in the House or the Senate, because many of them have worked their way through where they've been on state legislatures. So they are literally career politicians from day one and have never actually held an actual job. What do you think about that, Debbie? Debbie? Did you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you there, Clive. Yeah. I was just looking up some stuff on Hoyer. Yep. Wow. You know what? I think you guys are right. And what we need to remind everybody is the election is Tuesday, the 8th of November. And that's when you get your chance to give Mr. Hoyer his marching orders and tell him maybe at the age of 83, he ought to go get another job.
Well, I would encourage them to go into retirement at this point. I mean, come on. You've been on the government payroll long enough. You should have accumulated enough money. And the majority of these people are doing quite well financially. Wouldn't you agree, Kristen?
I would. And this guy, what's crazy to me is that because he had a very brief stint as a lawyer, it's almost like he never really grew up, right? So when people say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I guess he just said, I just want to be a government representative. And that's pretty much where he's been his whole life. At 81, or I'm sorry, at 83, he was elected in 81. I'd say he's running out of gas. And again, as I always say, I'm not so sure that he's as relevant as he once was. I mean, I remember in the press, the big day when Iran released 52 hostages, right? That's the time he was elected. He came in with Reagan. I mean, and Reagan has been out for a long time. So I just am not certain that he has continued to stay relevant with today's issues. I looked up some things. Liberty usually does this, so I was waiting to see if he was going to steal my thunder. But, back then gas was around or under $1.25 a gallon. He's seen us through recessions, inflation, and I'm just wondering what he's going to do to help prevent this from continuing cycle after cycle after cycle. So.
Yeah, well, it's what we voted in, and that's what we're all about, is quit voting these characters in. I don't know. I just, do you think he can even relate to people like you, Joe?
Well, I don't. To be frank, he's 83 years old. I know we were kind of harping on this whole thing of him never having really another job outside of office, but it's true. I'm 17 and I've already held a different job than, like, I've worked minimum wage. I've worked, remotely. It's crazy to me that someone can exceed my age by so much and have held fewer jobs than I have. Another thing that's very pertinent in regards to Hoyer is the fact that he's considered a top spender of taxpayer funds. I think with a lot of politicians who have that sort of title, we need to remember that they may have distanced themselves from their constituents. I believe that if someone's able to spend these egregious amounts of taxpayer money, it means that it's because they aren't in touch with the people that they're supposed to represent. And as they lose touch with the people who keep voting them in, they can't represent their best interests. So that's all I really have to say about Hoyer.
Yes, and that's a good point. That's called OPM, other people's money. It's really easy to spend other people's money, and we spent too much. Oh, well.
Yeah.
So with that, we're going to move on to our next Hall of Shamer, which is Representative Chris Smith out of New Jersey. He's been reelected 21 times. And from my understanding, it's for almost 20 years, he hasn't had a town meeting or a hall meeting and really doesn't address his constituency. What do you think about that, Debbie? Debbie? Am I muted?
No, we can hear you.
Okay.
Maybe Debbie's having a problem with her.
I'm sorry. I'm not hearing you very well. You keep kind of clicking out there. You're asking me what I think. So yeah, representation is really important to me. And I'm very concerned about this guy. Okay, the Affordable Care Act, he had a lot of folks at a pretend town hall because he wasn't there. They had to pretend he was there, hoping to get his attention. And not everybody agrees on that, so I'll give him that one. But then he voted against establishing the Congressional Office of Congressional Ethics. And that's a little bit worrying. Anybody who votes against ethics, of course, would worry me. And he's, for a long time, he spent less than 20 days a year in his home state. So I can understand why folks in New Jersey are getting a little contentious about him. I don't think he's doing his job. I think he's forgotten what his job is, if he ever did know.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. What are your thoughts on that, Kristen?
Well, it's funny, when we went to my son's hockey game, we cut out big jumbo pictures of their heads, and that's how we cheered. We sat in the stands with these big, jumbo heads. And that's exactly what this reminded me of when I was reading about taking a cardboard cutout of himself. I mean, that is just unbelievable that someone who is there to support the public, who's been elected in by the public, feels that that is acceptable. He, in this sense, really, he has expired in terms of being relevant even more quickly than Hoyer. I mean, he's been there longer than Hoyer, 21 times. I have to ask the people of New Jersey, are we just on autopilot? Are we voting because the name is familiar? Or are we really looking at these issues? Because right now we have about 5.5, 6 weeks to really do some legwork and find out, what is he doing for the state? Do we really need to have another Chris Smith in there yet 22 times? I'm just not sure that that's something that anybody needs. Shame on New Jersey if you think that this guy is okay after 21 times being elected.
I have to agree. It's sort of like an old dog treat, isn't it? What do you think, Liberty? It gets stale for a while.
Well, I'll tell you what, I need to act ethically for my human. Why not Chris? Now, I can't get away with any of that. I can't sneak into the cookie jar on my own. I have to wait for my human to give me a cookie. So why did he vote against establishing the Office of Congressional Ethics? What do you think about that, Clive? Like that is what we call a tell. Yeah. It's like, if you don't know what this guy's about, if he voted against that, he obviously doesn't want anyone looking into his activities, and he doesn't even spend time in the state he claims to represent. So how can he possibly know what the people in that state need? That's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I think it's more of a case where he just doesn't care anymore. He takes that check and he does what he can. And, and then again, here's a guy who was elected, probably before you were born.
Yeah, I think you could say that for almost everyone that we discussed probably falls into that of being elected or pretty much elected, re-elected multiple times before I really even existed. And when we speak about politicians, there's a lot of sort of propaganda going around on their parts, on their opponents' parts, spreading, they're good because of this or bad because of this. But really the most telling thing about politicians is their voting history. And this is especially true for Chris Smith. I mean, if we look at what he's voted for, what he's voted against, like Liberty was saying, it's a tell. Voting against ethics is not something that I would want in my representative, at least. He also voted to repeal Wall Street reforms. Makes you wonder, like Liberty was saying, what's he got in there? What's he hiding? Why would he vote against something that objectively should be happening? We should be reforming. We should be changing and growing and making things better. And so if he's voting against that change, I can't see how he's going to tackle the changing and evolving issues that are going to keep facing him if he keeps getting elected.
Yeah, the one thing you can say about this gentleman is that he is honest about he doesn't like ethics. And I mean, that in itself is just sad. He's voting against ethics because he likes life and his lifestyle, and he has no concerns for ethics or the people he serves.
Unacceptable.
Indeed. Well, that was a great discussion. And I'd like to refer back to my little intro there, and which was indicative of some of our senior representatives, because I'm slowly heading into that senior stratosphere. And the fact that I couldn't even remember my notes from 10 minutes before I started this indicates where some of these people are, unlike my younger counterpart, Debbie.
Not much.
But you definitely seem far more alert, I gotta say.
You know, Clive, speaking of that, what do you think about asking Tully if she could come on the show? Wouldn't it be cool to have Tully Gabbard on the show?
I do, and I think, that's a great idea. And I'm going to reach out to anybody who might have a contact on her or any kind of info. Please send it to us, and we'd be happy to reach out to her. And if Tulsi, if you manage to see this, we would love to have you on this show because we have the greatest respect for you because you are actually willing to get out there and tell us what you truly believe, because that's what true representatives are, is telling us what they believe, what's best for their constituency, regardless of the party behind them.
Yeah. That
So,
sounds great. I think we should do a big shout out and a thank you and a round of applause for Tulsi.
yes, indeed, indeed. And with that, I think that'll wrap our show for today. And thank you for joining us.